Hello everyone and welcome to the second part of this tutorial series, and in this one I'll be introducing you into the BLoC pattern for your Flutter applications. So in the previous video I introduced you guys into streams in that programming language, and we saw how the basic workflow of how streams work in your Dart programs. So in the previous video we created a very simple Flutter application that was powered by Dart streams, and you can see this is where we stopped. This is where we left off. So everything we coded in this particular widgets, all this whole stuff inside this particular widget is called business logic. So what business logic simply means is a set of rules that determines how data is being created, manipulated, and stored in your application. So the disadvantage with this approach, like we did in our previous video, is that this widget is responsible for handling the view. So it's responsible for handling the UI. So adding all this additional logic into your widget is not very good, because if your application scales, your UI will be mixed up with your business logic, and this would not be really good for large applications. So like I said previously, business logic are just set of rules that determine how data is being created and stored in your application. So you can see over here, this function determines how the stream will be updated, and this function is inside your widgets, which is your UI widgets. Adding this data into your UI widget is not always good for scalability. So I just wanted to point out what business logic simply means. So having your rules for manipulation and all your data in your widgets is not always a good idea. So I'll come back to this. So let me talk about the BLoC pattern. So what the BLoC pattern simply does is that it takes out your business logic out of your widget. So previously, from the source code I just showed you right now, our logic is inside our, you can see this logic, all this logic over here, data logic is inside our widget. So what the BLoC pattern simply does is that it takes out this logic into a separate file, and that file, we can call it a component, whereby all the whole rules for how your data will be manipulated would be stored inside here. So the first advantage about this approach is separation of concerns. So you know that your UI widget is just going to be focused on UI, is going to be focused on view. Then you dedicate a separate file for all your whole business logic. So if you come over here, you can see now your widgets is just going to be focused on the view part of your application. Then you delegate all this whole data stream tags into something called your BLoC. So the BLoC stands for business logic components, whereby you copy out all this stream manipulation into that separate component of your application. So with that, you now have your view separated from your business logic. So one of the advantages of this is that if you have your business logic into a separate component or into a separate file, you can easily test your business logic separately. You can even easily test if your data is being manipulated the right way you want it to be. Then you can also test your view separately to show, for instance, if when a button is clicked, you want a particular UI to hide. You can test all these different parts of your application separately. So the other two guys over here are optional. So for instance, now you have a repository. So a repository is just simply kind of like where you store your data. So your BLoC accesses your repository, and your repository gives back the data into the BLoC. Then you also have this data. I'm going to be explaining, when we get into code, I'm going to be showing you the differences between all these layers. But the first one we're going to be talking about is the BLoC and the view. We'll see how they work. And this data can also be gotten from, for instance, from an API endpoint. So you do all the whole manipulations, you update your model, then you pass it to the repository, then the repository passes it into the BLoC. So I would also explain why you need to create a repository instead of your BLoC contacting the data directly. I'm going to explain that as we progress in the tutorial. So the first thing I want to do in this tutorial would be to convert this our existing friend list app into a BLoC powered app. So what that simply means is that I'm going to be taking out all this logic into a separate file. Then I'll now be calling that particular file in this widget. So that with that approach, we've solved the first two parts of this diagram. So I'll head back to Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to be creating, I have some files I created here, which we're going to be covering in the next section of this tutorial, although it's going to be still in this same video. So this app has the friend list app, which we are all familiar with, and also has a movie search app, which we are going to build later on. So I'll provide you with the source code for this. So the first one we're going to be doing is to convert this app into a block powered app. That's like to change the pattern into a block pattern. So I'm going to create a new folder. And the reason why I'm converting this is just to show you guys that block is not a library. It's still the same thing like we've done previously. It's just that we are separating it from the UI. We are separating it from the view this time around. So I'm going to name this, I'm going to create a new file called friend list of friends block. So it's going to be a class. I'll name it friends and I'm just going to copy out everything inside here. So if you understood the previous video, you'd see that everything we are doing here is just to separate it from the widgets. So block is just a pattern. It is not a library or a framework or something like that. So it's still the same Dart code we had, but we're just kind of like putting it in a separate file. So cool. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is, remember what we did in this friend list app. In this friend list app, we had a dispose method whereby we have to close all our whole controllers. We had to close the stream controller to prevent memory leaks. And if you watch the previous video, you'd remember the reasons I gave for not closing, the bad things that could happen if you don't close your controller. And you can see that format helps us with the error message that we need to close instances of that.core.sync. So over here, I'm going to close it, friends controller dot what close. Cool. So now the next thing to do would be to save this. And there's something I'm going to do quickly, because later on when we're creating the movie search app, we are going to be creating a second block for that. So instead of, sometimes I might forget to actually implement this dispose method, although this that format would always remind us about that through this error message. But I could do something very quickly. I could create a base block. And this base block is just going to be an abstract class that every block should implement. So every block that implements this class must have the dispose method. So this is kind of like room keeping, so you won't forget to do that. Although your code editor would prompt you to actually do that. So over here in friends block, I could just come and implement base block. And if I don't implement the dispose method, can you see? It will tell you that it needs to implement a missing method. So that's just basic room keeping. So now that we've done this, the next thing we're going to be doing is to have our streams. So I'm going to create, because now we are no longer, these components would no longer have access to this controller because we'll soon delete all these things. So I'm going to make the streams available to I'm going to do a list of what string, and it's going to be a getter because it's in a class. I just want it to be, I don't want the outside world to access the controller directly, so I'm just creating a getter for the stream. So I'll call it friend stream, whichever one. Friend stream, and it's going to be returning what friends controller friends controller dot stream. And if you remember from the previous video, the controller class has two properties, which is the stream and the sync. So over here, I'm now making the getter accessible to the outside world, the stream accessible to the outside world through a getter. So that is the first part. Then the next thing we need to do over here would be in our friend list. Did I copy the friends array? Yes, I did. So I'm going to be removing all the whole business logic, hence the name business logic component, because currently now this file is now where all our whole business logic is going to be contained. So like I said, business logic is just a set of rules that determine how data can be created and stored in your application and how they can also be manipulated. So you can see now when you look at this file, it has all the whole logic. You create a friends controller, you have the stream, you can add a new friend, and whenever you are unmounting a widget, you could also close the controller. So you can see with this approach now, we are separating the business logic out of our UI. So our widget is just going to be focused on only the UI parts, the view parts. So I'm going to delete all these stuffs. So tomorrow we could just swap out this friend list with another widget, and it doesn't have to think about the stream controller and all those stuffs. And as we progress, you'll see how this block pattern helps you to manage your state effectively. Okay, cool. So the next thing I'll be doing would be to save this, and would have some errors because of this method is not here. So the next thing I'll do would be to, since we've created this business logic component, since we've created this guy separately, we can now import it into our friend list app. And everything in this file should not be strange to you if you followed the first tutorial. So I'll come over here, and the first thing I'll import would be the friends block should be equals to friends block. So we now have the block right now. So this variable over here is going to contain all the whole business logic, and it's going to have access to this stream and this methods. So now I'm going to be doing something. So since we have it over here, I'm going to be, so now we can now do friends, was that what I named it? Friends block dot add friend. So we have the friends block dot add friend now. And over here, we are no longer having access to the stream controller, but we have access to the controller, to the stream via what? Friends block dot friend streams. So now for the item counts, we're going to be doing, the item count is going to be the list of these friends, but we don't have access to these friends now because it's a private member of this class. So what we can easily simply do would be to do list. We'll create a getter for this, should be equals to, should return should return friends. So this approach is so we won't be manipulating the data directly. We just have getters. So you won't be able to set the data from the outside world just like that. So I'm going to be doing friends block dots friends dot length. Cool. So are we missing anything? So you see the stream builder now is now connected to our block, right? Via the friend stream. So if we save this, let's see if, let me just do a hot restart just in case. Okay. So now, if I head over to the friend list, let's see if it works. So I'm going to add cool, everything still works like we did it previously. So I'm going to add one more. Cool, everything works. So I see one of the problems that beginners face with this whole block pattern is that they just come straight to block pattern without having a good understanding of how streams work in that. And you can see in a few minutes we converted our stream powered widget into a block application or block powered application. So from the previous video, I implemented all the whole business logic inside this widget. So what the block pattern simply does or simply tells you to do is that it just simply tells you take all those logic of your data streams out of your widgets into a separate file. And that separate file, that separate file can be categorized as something called blocks. So you can see this same whole idea, the same code was just in a separate file, and that makes it a block-powered application. Nothing more, nothing less. And it's still powered by streams. So that is the first part. So the next thing I want to do is, first of all, remember what I told you guys about reactive programming. I mentioned that reactive programming is where your application is being powered by data streams. But if you come to this friend list component, over here on submitted, I am directly calling a function, the add friend function from the block. I'm currently calling the add friend function from the block. This is not really good. This is an anti-pattern because from this, when the only time you want your streams to be updated would be based on a particular event, based on when you sync a data into the stream. So using this type of pattern of calling this add friend directly is not really, it's an anti-pattern. So instead of calling add friend directly, you could create a separate stream for this text field that whenever you add into this text field, it should call this particular method, which makes the application fully reactive. But I would not be implementing that in this particular friend list app because the main app I want to implement in this video is the movie search app. So this is just block in a nutshell. So if you understand this up to this point, then you are good to go. So for the movie search app, we're going to be using the OpenMovie API. We're going to be using the OpenMovie database API. So you can get an API key and it's free. So you head over to this website and get an API key for that. So I have already done some groundwork for you guys by creating the UI. So it's just a very simple RESTful API endpoint whereby you put in a title and it gets the corresponding movie. So let's see if it doesn't work out. Refresh this page. So I'm going to search for Avengers. So you can see it returns a JSON. It returns JSON. So for this, I copied out this JSON and I pasted it inside this quicktype.io, and it generated the my model file for me. So over here in my Flutter app, I have already done that already. So this is just what it generated for me, and this tutorial is not focusing on how to create models. If you've done your basic Flutter, you should know how this works. So you have the model for the particular JSON, and we have the movie from JSON and movie to JSON methods. So that's the model part. Then we also have the API. So the API fetches data from the endpoints and it returns a feature, which is a movie. So this movie is just the model class over here. The movie is the model class. So back to the API. So we're just going to be working with one API here. So this is the URL, and remember to get your API key. I had my own API key and I put it in this secret file, although this is not the best approach to hide your API keys, but we'll just let that be for this tutorial. So you have this API which just gets a movie, you pass it a name. So this name is going to be over here, the name you type in. So we pass it a name, and I did some string interpolation. So if the response is successful, pass it to the movie model, then return it. So it passes it from JSON to this movie model, else through an exception. So that's just the basic stuff. Then the next part of code I've written is this stuff called the repo, or a repository, from the diagram we have over here. So I told you that your widget communicates with your block, which is what we've seen over here. So if I go over to friend list, you can see that our widget communicates with our block over here, and the block communicates with what? Our repository. Then the repository communicates with our data, and this data is being gotten from an API endpoint. So now in our API, this is the API that returns a movie. So our block would not be having access to this API directly. I'm going to explain why. But instead, our block will have access to this repo. So what this repository just does is that it calls the corresponding API and gives you a handy method to use in your block file. So like I said, I'm going to come back to explain why we need to create this kind of structure, although one of the benefits is separation of concerns. So for instance, now if you change the API, if you change this code, if you change this particular code, maybe you don't want to use the OMDB API, you want to use the TMDB API, and you want to change the method name. So when you do all the changes here, the only place you need to update would be in your repo file. But if you did not have this repository file, you'd have to be updating each and every one of your block in your application. So that's just the background of the code I've written so far. And I've also created the UI for you guys. So the next thing we'll be doing would be to head over to the movie search. And the movie search UI is a very basic UI. Over here, I have the custom AppBar, which we'll be talking about later on. So now what we want to do is we want, whenever the user types in over here, whenever the user searches for a movie and clicks enter, the movie should be gotten from the API. So to do this, the first thing I'll do would be to go create my block, because remember the block powers the data in the UI. So the first thing to do would be to create a new file called movie search block, movie search block, and it's going to follow the same structure. So I'll call it movie search block, and it's going to implement the base block. Implement the base block. So now it's going to tell us, the beauty of having this kind of like interface is that your code editor would tell you that you should implement the missing override. So cool. So now for this, I'm going to be creating what? first of all, let's head back to this diagram. So the block is going to be interacting with the repository. So if it's going to be interacting with the repository, the first thing I'm going to do would be to create the repository here. So I'm going to say movie repo equals to movie repo. Cool. So we now have it over here. Then the next thing would be to create our controllers. So I'm going to create the first one, movie let me just call it movie controller should be equals to stream controller, and to import the dat.async package. Then it should be of type what? Type movie. So I'll import movie, and it's going to be telling us that we need to do what? Close our stream, our controller. So I'm going to do movie controller dot close. Cool. Then the next thing I'll be doing would be to have my getter. So the getter, that's the stream itself. The getter would be, the stream would be of type what? Movie. So I'm going to call it movie. Should I call it movie stream? Whichever one. And it's going to be returning movie controller dot stream. And the next thing to do would be to create a fetch movie. Okay, just fetch movie. Going to explain what I'm doing. So this function is going to be interacting with the movie repo. So over here, I'm going to be saying it's going to be an asynchronous function because movie repo returns a future. It returns a future over here. So that's why this is going to be an asynchronous function, because we'll be doing something like async await. So over here, I'm going to say final movie should be equals to await movie repo dot find movie by name, and we'll pass in the name of the movie here. Cool. So now what are we going to do with the return type? We're going to now add it into the stream. And the way we are going to add it to the stream is very simple. We'll just do movie controller. You can see the beauty of learning about dat streams before jumping into the BLoC pattern. So what do I want to add? I want to add the movie to this controller, and it's going to work because movie, it's going to return type movie, and this controller accepts what? Type movie. This movie is coming from the models file. So this is the first part of this. And remember what I told you from the last part. I told you that this friends block, having to call this stuff directly from your widget is an anti-pattern. It is only your streams. Your streams should drive your application. Your streams should drive your UI. So instead of calling this method directly, what we could do would be to create another controller, and I'm going to call this query controller. So it's going to be in charge of calling this fetch movie. Our UI should not be in charge of calling fetch movie. Instead, an action of another stream should dispatch this fetch movie event handler. So I'm going to call it query controller, and it's going to be accepting a string, because in our UI over here, whatever you type here is going to be outputted as a string. So the query controller is going to be in charge of this text box, text field. So whenever I click the enter key over here, whenever I click done key, this string is going to be sunk into the query controller. And when it's being sunk into the query controller, the listener should now call this FetchMovie. So enough talk, let me show you what I mean. So over here, I'm going to be doing it inside a constructor. So what a constructor does from your normal programming is that whenever your class is being instantiated, your constructor will be called. So as long as that class is currently on the stack, as long as the class exists on the stack, it will keep listening for events. So over here in our constructor, what I'm going to be doing would be, I would say query controller dot stream dot listen. So whenever something is being sunk into this query controller, I want to call this function, which is a callback. So remember, it's going to have a value and it's going to do something like print, but we won't be doing it this way. So instead of having this function written inside here, we can just call the FetchMovie function. So what that simply means is that whenever you sync data into the query stream, it should do what? FetchMovie. So whenever I type in Avengers here and I click this button, it syncs into that query stream. What should happen? Your application should react by doing what? Fetching a movie. So everything I'm talking about, you should be familiar with it if you followed the first video. Although that video was very long, but if you followed it religiously, you'd have all these things I'm explaining very easy. So now, this is truly how reactive application works. So whenever data is being sunk into this query controller, the query controller should now do something. What should it do? It should do what? Fetch a movie. So next thing to do would be to also create a getter, to create a function, the function that would actually sync data into this query. So I'm going to be creating a function that will accept type what? String, because whatever I type inside here would be a string. And it's going to be a getter. The beauty of having getters is so you won't directly have access to this controller. So I'm going to call this what? Query. And it is going to be query controller.sync.add. So it's going to be calling the add method. So you can see over here, can you guess why this stuff is giving this error? Simple, it's giving this because of we have not closed the controller. So I'll close it over here. And I think there's one mistake I made in this friends. I did not close, where's the screens? In my friend list, I did not close our block. So you have to always close your block in your dispose method to prevent memory leaks. And I explained all that in the first video. So I'm going to do here, I'm going to do friends block dot what? Dispose. So whenever that friends, because currently now, as we've been in this movie search screen for a long while, in the other screen, which is the friendly screen, the controller, the stream is still listening for inputs. And if you make that type of mistakes in so many places, it will cause memory leaks, which could crash your applications. So as we are on this movie search screen, at the background, the friends block is still listening for values. So you always have to close it in your dispose method. Always call this. So now let's continue. Okay, so we have the movie search block up and running, and it's connected. It's getting its data from the repo, and the repo is connected to what? Our API endpoint. So let us continue. Am I missing anything? No, I'm not. Okay, so now we have the movie search block. The next thing to do would be to head over to the movie search screens and make use of it. So inside our movie search screen, I'm going to be doing this. movie search block should be equals to movie search block. Cool. So the first thing to do, always remember, we should do what's called on the dispose method to do what? To dispose this block, and we'll dispose it before the application on mounts. So I'll say movie search block dot what dispose. So here we are safe that there won't be any memory leaks. So when we save this movie search block, the next thing to do would be would have to do two things. First of all, we have to connect it to our custom AppBar, because from this AppBar we are going to be dispatching some actions. We're going to be dispatching some actions to the stream. So I'm going to pass this movie search block into the AppBar, because currently, okay, I could just close this and also close this. Then if I go to the AppBar, let's see. The AppBar is very basic. So you have the AppBar and you have the search box. So this search box, on submitted, I want to do what? Sync into the query stream. So over here, whenever I click the submit button, I want to sync into this query stream, and I'm going to be doing that with this method. So let me see. That's query. Okay, I'll come back to that. So over here, the first thing I'm going to be doing would be to just create this and pass in movie search block. Then in our custom AppBar, I'm going to add this property, block property. So over here, I'm going to do that quickly. Final block. Then I'm going to create the constructor for this. Then inside the build method, I'm going to pass in the block, because that's where I'll be making use of it. Okay, it's a stateful widget, so it should be widget.block. Although this should have been a stateless widget, but okay, widget.block. Am I doing something wrong? Okay, let me. Okay. Oh, it's a stateless widget. What am I doing? So I pass in the block over here. The block that was passed in into the widget, I'll pass it over here. So why is it complaining? Okay. Then inside this build search box function, which returns a widget, I'll pass the widget over here. So in order to avoid any confusion, I'll pass in the type over here. So I'll say movie search block to help us with IntelliSense. But I'm not going to be making use of that particular class. I'm going to be inheriting it. I'm going to be getting the instance from the movie search widget over here. So we're not creating a new instance. We're just importing this thing so I can be able to get the members of this particular class correctly via IntelliSense. Okay, so now the next thing I need to do would be on submitted. What do I need to do? I need to call block dot query. Okay, I think I should add. Let me name this thing to add query. I think it's better that way, add query. Okay, so now block dots. So if I did not import this and I did something like this, block dots, can you see no IntelliSense to show me the members? So that was why I imported this class over here, so IntelliSense could help me with this. So block dots add query. So this add query function is going to be syncing into the query stream. So block dot add query, and it's going to have the value of unsubmitted, which is the string. So whatever value is inside this text box will be passed to this function. So let's head back to the movie search. So you can see the add query, it's a sync, it's of type stream sync. So whenever we add the query, what should happen, it should be added into this query controller. I remember whenever the query controller gets a value, this function will be triggered. So immediately we add to the query controller, it should do what? Fetch us a movie. So now the next thing to do would be to actually connect our movie search app to our stream. And remember how we did it in previous videos? We used something called the stream builder, which is kind of like a subscription for your UI to your streams. So over here, we'll be making use of a stream builder inside. Where should we make use of that? Center text. Let me wrap the stream builder. Should I put it in a container? Okay, no. I think we should just use the stream builder directly. Okay. Oh. Oh, come on. Just being lazy to type this thing. So wrap with a stream builder. And the stream builder is going to be receiving what type movie. So we'd have to import the model, the movie model. And the next thing to do would be to pass the stream. And you make use of the stream via the block. So I'll say movie search block dots movie stream. So we have the stream builder connected, and this whole stuff you should be familiar with it by now, what the builder does. So now we're going to be doing a simple, and we don't need an initial data over here because we'll be doing an if-else statement. So if snapshot dot has data, do this, else what should you do? Return this. So if snapshot does have data, that means if there's something inside the stream, what do I want to do? Simple. I want to return the movie detail page. The movie detail page, which is going to take in the movie. So where would this movie be gotten from? The movie is going to be gotten from snapshots data, snapshot.data, right? Yes, because it is going to be snapshot.data. It won't be a list anymore, because in our friend list app, the stream controller was of type list of string. But in our movie search app, the stream controller is just what? A movie, just needs one movie. So you don't have to use the index. So now, once I save this, I already provided this movie detail page for you, and it is just, I don't want to go through creating all this stuff, so I just copied it from a tutorial, from this tutorial. I just copied it from this tutorial to have this type of UI instead of me coding it from scratch. So that's the beauty of open source. So now let's save this and see. And to play safe, I'm going to do a hot restart. I'll do a hot restart. Which should take us back to the main screen, to the home screen. Okay. Okay, so now I click on the movie search app. The movie search link, I mean. Come on, why are you not? Oh, I have to close the, but we will not do that in this tutorial. So what movie I'm going to search for? I'm going to search for Midsummer. This movie is amazing. So now we're going to wait for it to get the data. And if it doesn't, okay, cool, it's working. This movie is amazing. Watched it some days ago. So now we have the Midsummer movie. The next one I'm going to search for is, what's the name of this movie? It. I'm going to search for It. And everything is working accordingly. And the final movie I'm going to search for is Hereditary by RxDart. Okay, now, so you see how everything works. So whenever I type into this text field, inside my custom AppBar here, whenever I click on it, what it's actually doing is that it is syncing this text, is syncing this string into the stream. And we did that over here. So whenever I click add query, it is doing what? Query controller.sync.add. So whenever something is being added to that stream, as long as the movie search block has an instance running in our application. So over here, the instance over here is what we created here. As long as it is running in our application, it is going to be listening for what? Events. So whenever I click on Hereditary, if I click on Hereditary, what happens is that this listener, which returns a stream subscription, is going to execute this callback. So remember what I told you guys about asynchronous programming from the first video. Asynchronous programming only executes code when it should be executed. So it doesn't just stay there and be executing line by line. So FetchMovie would never execute until I do what? Sync into the query controller stream. So whenever I sync into it, this listener will execute this callback, this function inside here. And what does it do? It takes the name of the movie, which we've typed here, and it passes it to the movie repos find movie by name method. Then when it gets it, then what should happen? The movie should be sunk into the movie controller. So this is reactive programming using the BLoC pattern. And let me click on this. Voila, lovely. So everything is working. So this is just the BLoC pattern in a nutshell. And I hope I've demystified it up to a certain level in this video, although the series is still on. But if you understood the last video we did and also this, then you are like 90% done with this BLoC pattern. So the next thing and the final thing I want to make mention of is this. Let's see, and whenever we close this component, what should happen? This dispose method is being called, so we are safe from any memory leak. So there's one thing I want to mention in this video, and it is this stuff over here. I want you guys to notice something. We have this movie search widget, and we instantiated the movie search block over here. And to be able to use it in our text, in our custom AppBar, what do? We passed it down to our custom AppBar, right? We passed in the block to our custom AppBar. And over here in our custom AppBar, we added it as a final field and added it as a member of this class. So as it's a member of this class and it is not being instantiated, we have to call the constructor over here, which accepts this argument. So I'm going to say is required. It's a required field, cool. And from this custom app bar, what did we had the build method, and from this build method we passed it down to build search over here, and from build search we now executed the add query method. So there's something you should notice about this flow. What if, for instance, now we had multiple what if we had had a deeply nested tree of widgets? So here we are just like two levels deep, and we passed this block over here. So imagine if we had like this movie search screen, a particular widget somewhere was like 6 or 7 levels deep in the widgets tree. We have to pass block down from here down to, or from custom app bar down to all the whole children to get to where it will be used. That method is not really efficient because there are some times you'll be building some applications that you'd be 5, 6, 7 level deep in your widget tree, and you have to create just one instance of this search block. You can't just be creating different instances down your tree, because this instance would not be equals to a new instance you'd create 5 levels deep in your widget tree. So now we have to find a way to be able to pass this block down to its children instead of passing it down from this. Because when you pass it this way, this is something called implementation detail. So this custom app bar now, when you're creating the custom app bar, you have to tell whoever is creating the custom app bar that you have to add some class properties called block. And probably this custom app bar might be using 2 or 3 blocks. So you have to now be creating this implementation detail inside the constructor, because now when you create a custom app bar and it doesn't have this block, your application would not work how it's supposed to work, and you always have to put this block property wherever you're going to be using it. So if you had this stuff 5, 6 level deep, each widget in that tree would have this block property, and this is not really efficient for scalability. It does not really scale nicely. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about how to eliminate passing this kind of thing down the widget tree. So we want to kind of like create something that would be able to prevent you passing it from here. So you could just create your custom app bar and do what? Inject the block dependency. So we're going to be doing something called dependency injection, whereby we don't have to add this stuff in our constructor. We can just inject the block we want to use into our widget tree wherever we want to use. So you don't have to be passing it step by step by step, because you can see we passed it from movie search widgets down to custom app bar. From custom app bar, we passed it down to the build search box. Then from build search box, we now made use of it. So this is not really efficient, and you can see the problem with this approach is that as your app grows, you would have to be passing this stuff everywhere. So we want to eliminate that in the next video. We'll be creating something called a provider, which is what I'll be talking about in the next video. So that'll be it for this video, and you can see what we've achieved from this video. So we removed all the whole logic from our widget. So our widget is now linear, which just focuses on doing what? Creating the UI, creating the view. We took all those business logic into a separate file called, into a separate class called the business logic components. And I told you the business logic are just simply rules that guides creation of data and how data is being stored and manipulated in your application. So the block component is going to be in charge of handling that. And the block component interacts with the repository, and the repository interacts with your API. And I told you the advantage of having these repositories is that tomorrow you could change the function names in your API provider. You could change the API URL. You could change the underlying data. So if there was no repository and your block was communicating directly with the data layer, you would have to be updating all your whole blocks to have these new names. But with the repository approach, you just come to the repository file and you just come to the repository file and you just update it from here. So you just have like one single place to get this data. And sometimes your application might be using like FindMovie can be hitting 2 or 3 APIs or 2 or 3 endpoints. So you have the movie API handle all those 3 endpoints. Then inside your repo, you just call them all. So that'll be it for this video. And I hope this video was helpful to you. So in the next video, we'll be covering the provider class, which would help us eliminating passing properties down multiple trees. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.